Welcome to Florez Family History Part 3. This video is for my daughter, Jacqueline Hope Florez. I hope you enjoy this. From what your grandmother researched on Ancestry.com, some of our ancestors may have come from the Basque Country in Spain. Let's watch a couple of minutes of video on Spanish history.
The territory of Spain today comprises of 195,365 square miles, being principally made up of land on the Iberian Peninsula, sharing borders with Portugal to the west, France to the north, as well as the small principality of Andorra. Spain also controls the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean and the Canary Islands in the Atlantic, as well as the two small enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla on the northern shore of Morocco's coastline. However, at the beginning of the 19th century, the total amount of territory to which Spain laid claim to exceeded a staggering 5 million square miles, stretching throughout almost the entirety of the Americas, from California all the way to Argentina, and even further afield to the far side of the Pacific Ocean, with the Philippines in Eastern Asia. Although this marked the peak of Spain's territorial possessions, many of these lands were brought under Spanish rule in the prior 3 centuries, in what was one of the most remarkable and rapid rises to power of any nation in history. This is how Spain became the world's first superpower. In the late 1530s, the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto began a series of explorations along the northern frontier of New Spain. These saw him chart much of the territory across what is now the southern United States, from Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, westwards through Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. There were advanced civilizations here also, mound-building cultures living in considerable towns and cities like Etowah and Cahokia. However, while De Soto was able to bring back information on these regions, no determined efforts were made by the Spanish to colonize these regions for many years, except for some tentative settlements along the coastline of Florida and in southern Texas. Quite simply, there was better, more readily available land closer to Mexico City and other core parts of the Spanish Empire to settle first. Two areas which were experiencing increasing interest during the second half of the 18th century were California and Texas. In particular, the southwest of California was being explored by the Franciscan missionary Junipero Serra and his followers from the late 1760s onwards. Over the course of the next decade, they would establish a dozen missionary settlements along the coastline of California, which would later serve as the founding of the cities of San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Meanwhile, in the more established centers of Spanish colonial rule, such as Mexico City, Lima, Buenos Aires, and Santiago, there were growing divisions. There were effectively 3 classes of individuals living here by the 18th century. The Peninsulares were administrators and newcomers to the Americas who had been born in Spain. Criollos were people of Spanish descent who were born in the New World but to parents of exclusively Spanish heritage. Finally, there were the Mestizos, people born in the Americas to a mix of Spanish and native ancestors. These varied groups were developing different allegiances to Spain, with mainly the Criollos and the Mestizos increasingly believing that the colonies would be better off ruling themselves. Even though the Spanish Empire had clearly stagnated by the end of the 18th century, it had not yet collapsed.
In our last video, I mentioned that our earliest ancestor was Nicolas Lucero de Godoy, born in 1646 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He passed away on April 27, 1727, at about 81 years old. My mom did some more digging and found Juan Jose Lopez de Godoy, born in 1570. He married Maria Inez Gonzalez de Ceramillo on March 1, 1586 in Asuncion, Tabasco, Mexico. They had one child during their marriage. He died on April 27, 1627 in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the age of 41. Another interesting person she found was Juan Antonio Lucero de Godoy, Sergeant Major. When he was born on January 1, 1622 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, his father, Pedro, was 22. He was married 6 times and had 1 son. You can do your own research and find out what kind of military action he would have been involved with during his time in the military. He died on June 20th, 1719, in his hometown, at the impressive age of 97 years old. Antonio Grego Trujillo was born in 1696 in Bojoaque, New Mexico. He married Maria Juana Marquez de Ayala, and they had one son together. He then married Maria Inez de Tapia on July 1st, 1717 in Nambe, New Mexico. He died on April 25th, 1778 in Cuyamongi, New Mexico, having lived a long life of 82 years. One last interesting person she found in our family tree, Blas de la Candelario Trujillo, born on July 30th, 1720 in Santa Cruz, New Mexico. He had one son. He died on October 1824 in his hometown at the age of 104. In the military, he was a private and fought for the Union during the Civil War, 3rd Regiment, New Mexico Mounted Infantry. We couldn't find any history on when our distant relatives came over in a boat from the Basque Country in Spain, but it did happen at some time, and from what we learned in our last video, the Spanish made their way up from South America and into North America, where they encountered many Native Americans. Let's take a minute to watch an animated video.
Native Americans, also known as American Indians, Indigenous Americans, and other terms, are the indigenous people of the United States except Hawaii. The name Indian was given by Christopher Columbus, who mistakenly believed he had landed in the Indies. The history of Native Americans in the U.S. began in ancient times, tens of thousands of years ago.
As we just watched, North America was the home of Native Americans. Back then they were called Indians. There were many tribes throughout North America. Let's watch another video that goes into much more depth on the history of Native Americans that our family must have encountered on a regular basis.
What is the oldest Native American tribe? If you were hoping the answer was as easy as, say, Navajo or Cherokee, you might be surprised. In the United States, there are 5.5 million people who identify as having some Native American ancestry, and there are 574 recognized Native American tribes. The largest of those tribes is Navajo, which has around 340,000 members. Next is Cherokee with around 290,000, followed by Chippewa, Sioux, Choctaw, and Apache. However, the first settlers into North America likely arrived long before any of these tribes existed. We don't know for sure when and how people first migrated into North America, and there are several theories on how this happened. North and South America were the last continents to be inhabited by humans, at least 17,000 years ago, but possibly much earlier. The most common theory is that nomadic people from Asia moved across the Bering Strait into Alaska and settled there. At the end of the last ice age, Asia and North America were joined by a land bridge called Beringia. This was because sea levels were much lower then. Humans settled in Alaska but couldn't go further south because North America was covered in an ice sheet. When the ice started to melt, a single group of people moved south through a gap in the ice. Some believe that all Native Americans, both in North and South America, were descendants of this single group. So using this theory, Native Americans first settled in northwestern Alaska. Some people have suggested that humans could have arrived by boat, traveling close to the shores down the west coast of the continent. At first, it was thought that people arrived about 13,000 years ago. This was because of the discovery of a civilization that was called the Clovis. For many years, the Clovis were thought to be the first Native Americans, but over the last 30 years or so, this has been debunked as older discoveries were made. Here's a crash course in what we've discovered. Folsom, New Mexico. 10,000-year-old remains of an extinct bison were found with spear marks. Bluefish Caves, Yukon. 24,000-year-old animal bones discovered with human markings. Santa Rosa Island, California. 13,000-year-old human bones discovered, suggesting the use of boats. Paisley, Oregon. 15,000-year-old fossilized human feces discovered in a cave. Friedkin Site, Texas, 15,000-year-old human settlement discovered. Anzac, Montana, 12,500-year-old remains of an infant discovered, believed to be of the Clovis culture. In fact, DNA shows that the infant was closely related to native North Americans of today, and we believe the Clovis people are the direct ancestors of 80% of all living Native Americans in North and South America. Which tribe is the oldest? None of these early tribes still exists. Civilizations rise and fall, and the human landscape is always changing. So a tribe as we know it is highly unlikely to remain for thousands of years. You could ask, which of the current Native American tribes is the oldest? But this question isn't any easier. Before Europeans arrived, we only had oral records to rely on, and these tend to change over generations. Legends do tell the story of a great migration, including the crossing of a river, possibly the Mississippi. Origin stories are an important part of Native American culture, but they don't help us to date Native American tribes. For example, Cherokee tribal history says that they've existed since time immemorial. The Hopi are known amongst Native Americans as the oldest of tribes. We do know that the Hopi village of Oribe in Arizona could be the oldest continually inhabited settlement in the United States, at nearly 1,000 years old. We can also use language to trace the movement of Native Americans. Navajo and Apache are part of the Na-Dene language family, and the first Na-Dene-speaking peoples entered North America around 10,000 years ago. But the question, which is the oldest Native American tribe, is complex, and it may never have an answer. Native American origin stories and ancestry are an important part of their culture. At the same time, the science and history is constantly evolving, and new discoveries will no doubt challenge what we believe today. Maybe a better question is, how do we keep discovering, while at the same time respecting the culture and history of the Native Americans who live here today?
Somehow our distant relatives settled in areas of New Mexico and Arizona. During that time in the 1500s through the 1800s, there were incentives for Europeans to move to the west of America. This untamed and wild land, full of wars between Spanish settlers, Native Americans, and Mexicans, was full of danger and adventure. The governments were giving plots of land to people who would settle in these areas. I read some history books on this time, and these were very brave people who sacrificed a lot to move to the west and be right in the middle of these battles and wars. Let's watch another video on some of the oldest Native American footage ever. Okay, it's time to get out and about in Shanghai and check out some interesting locations as we continue to talk. I'm going to pick up my friend Skip, who's going to help with shooting some video.
Good morning.
What's up? All right, let's get ready to go.
Alright, here we are at the Avondale House, a former Spanish Augustinian procreation built in 1930. Alright, let's come inside and take a closer look. Sometimes I just kind of wonder what it would have looked like to walk down this alley almost 100 years ago. What kind of cars would be parked here? I really love exploring around Shanghai in these old neighborhoods. It's like if these buildings could talk, what stories would they tell us? Also, one of the best parts is venturing into these homes, which are always shared residences. And most always, the people are very welcoming. They might give me a strange look or say something to me like, "What am I doing there?" But when I explain to them that I am interested in the Shanghai architecture and history, they're always very welcoming. And sometimes they even give me a tour around the homes and into their homes sometimes too. Okay, so we're off to our next location. Alright, we'll be turning onto Beijing Road and then off to Nanjing Road. From what I always learned from our family is that we had strong roots in St. John's, Arizona. Here's a bit of information that I found. The location was originally called Tesin de Zahi in Navajo, a reference to its rock formations. The site of a useful crossing of the Little Colorado River, it was later called El Vadito, Spanish for the Little Crossing, by Spaniards as they first explored the area. Starting in 1863, a trader named Solomon Barth began crossing the area as he moved salt from a salt lake in Zuni territory to Prescott area. In 1874, St. John's was a thriving Spanish-American agricultural community when Solomon Barth acquired land and cattle nearby. Mormon pioneers from Utah settled in St. John's in 1879. The name El Vadito was changed to San Juan, Spanish for St. John, and to St. John's when the town was established in 1880. Now, to keep it kind of simple, I'm going to start with my great-great-grandparents that I personally met in St. John's, Arizona. Modesta Duran, or as we called her, Nana. Born on June 15, 1885 in Cubera, New Mexico, and passed on September 19, 1984, living to a ripe old age of 99 years old. She ran a restaurant in St. John's. She was married to Donicio Duran, born on December 23, 1871 in San Marcial, New Mexico, and passed on October 8, 1927, living to 55 years old. He was the sheriff of Apache County, Arizona. and they were married in 1903. Off to our next cool location. Now, Nana was raised by her grandmother because her parents died while coming across the desert from New Mexico to Arizona in a covered wagon, if you can believe that. They were one of the first families to settle in St. John. Here we see Antonia Duran Trujillo. We all called her Tony. Born on February 14th, 1908 in St. John's, Arizona, and passed on March 19th in 1997, living to a ripe old age of 89 years old. She is the daughter of Modesta and Donicio Duran. She was the oldest of 8 siblings.
Ah, 10分钟。
10分钟。
啊。Which way did we go last time?
I don't remember. I think we squeezed through in the. I think.
All right, we're almost arriving at our next destination. Ned Nocifor Trujillo. We all called him Tata. Born on May 13th, 1903 in St. John's, Arizona, and passed on March 27th, 1986, living to 82 years old. He is the son of Prudencio D. Trujillo and Amada Gonzalez. They both lived across the street from each other, and they met as children. Here are a couple of pictures of him. They got married in 1925. They were both raised in St. John's in little houses in a little town. They didn't grow up on a farm, but Ned, Tata as we grandkids called him, was a cowboy as a young man and did help other farmers, did some cattle drives and worked doing odd chores and working in town paving roads, tearing down, or helped build up different places. There's also a story of how when the Spanish flu, 1918, hit St. John's and how sad it was at that time with people in the city dying because of it. Tony helped in her own home with taking care of her younger siblings and taking care of the household chores, cooking, cleaning, etc. It wasn't until they were married that they lived on a little farm, ranch-style home where they grew corn, had a cow, a few pigs, and went on cattle drives. My aunts and mom always called her Tony. She would tell them she was too young to be called Grandma, so Tony it was. All us kids just called them Tony and Tata. I never knew why we called them Tata until now. My Aunt Robin told me it's Spanish. I looked into it, and it's a popular nickname Latin Americans give to their grandfather. My mom took me there to meet Nana and our relatives when I was about 4 years old. In this picture, I was about 5 years old when I flew there with my great-grandparents, Tony and Tata. They were great. I'm pretty sure this picture was taken in front of my grandparents' home. It's interesting how we were all dressed to a T in that picture. My cousin Gary also wore a similar suit as mine when he went for a visit to St. John's. We're now at Nanjing Road, the Cosmopolitan Apartments, built in 1934. Spanish architecture and shaped like a Spanish castle, towering above the alleyway houses. Okay, so from what I was told, Tata would never go downtown or any place without a white shirt, tie, and jacket. Those were the days when everyone would be dressed up to fly on a plane. Here's some stories from Aunt Robin. Tata had a thing for shoes. The man just couldn't have enough shoes, and he loved nice clothes. Maybe it comes from being raised on a ranch and living out in the country and working hard, whether it be on the land, working with horses, or helping with cattle drives that lasted days to weeks and longer at times. I never remember seeing him in Levi's, always slacks and a button-up shirt. As for the shoes, he used to love to have this old shoe anvil that I believe your mom has. He would always repair shoes on it, and he'd repair ours too, which I don't think Grandma liked too much, because he would put old pieces of rubber, like from an old tire or something, and glue them and use them with these little nails. The truth, they weren't pretty, that's for sure, but we never said anything to him, nor did we wear them too often, if at all. But he loved fixing them, and it made him happy, and that's what mattered. fashion, and with her being the oldest daughter of the 8 kids, she had a lot of responsibility around the house. And with that many kids, she had to help a lot in raising the younger ones. She was one special and funny lady. Pinned her hair up in little pin curls. She would use bobby pins, twist the little pieces of her hair around her finger, and use the bobby pins to hold. Wrap a scarf around her head, and voila, she'd wake up with curly hair. You gotta ask your mom about how to this day she still finds bobby pins like what Tony used a lot, like in her bed, on the floor, and in random places. It'd be a sign from Tony up in heaven that she's watching over her and all of us. So as we're wandering around this apartment building, we found this little deck area, and this really reminds me of Tony and Tata's old apartment building in downtown San Diego. I remember us kids going up there and playing, and there were some plants like these in these planters, and I think Tata was making stuff, and we could see the view of around San Diego, and it's just one of my clear memories of that time. They were both born and raised in St. John's, and with it being such a small town, and I mean small town, their families knew each other forever. Grandma used to say that the town was half Mexican Spanish and half Mormon, that they would call the Mexicans bean eaters and the Mormons potato eaters. I guess those were real fighting words. I do know that as a young boy, people used to call Tata Red because he had reddish hair and rosy cheeks. Story from Tata's nephew, Sonny, and Dick Trujillo, that when they got married, that the priest from St. John's wouldn't marry them because he thought they were cousins. Maybe like 4th or 5th cousins, who knows. So they went to the town next door and got married there. No questions asked. Tony nor Tata ever mentioned it, but I guess anything is possible. I do know that they spoiled Grandma like you wouldn't believe. She was their world. They did have another child. It was a boy, and his name was Andrew, and he passed at only a few months old. Younger than Grandma, and she said she remembered he had red hair. Tony and Tata bought her a fur mink-style coat as a little girl. They were so proud of it, but Grandma hated it. They would put it on her and send her to school, and she'd hide it in the bushes and put it back on before she got home. No one in that town had a coat like that. Grandma used to say how Tony would mix flour and water and make a paste out of it and put it on her face and arms so the sun wouldn't burn or tan her skin, and she would rub it off before they got into town. I guess an early sunscreen. Grandma used to say how her and her grandma, Tata's mother, would dig up old broken Indian pottery and make chalk out of it. And that when the planes would fly over, which wasn't very often, her and her grandma would throw rocks at them. Grandma as a child really thought she could hit one. Grandma had a horse named Pine, and when Tata's younger brother, Gavino, would go into town, he'd always buy her store-bought candy and bring it to her in a little brown bag. Say how she would lay in the alfalfa field with her horse and wait for him to come riding up on his horse, waving that little bag of store-bought candy in the air and calling her name. She'd say how she'd wave her arms and squeal, "I'm here, I'm here." It was great hearing her relive that special time in her life and to hear her telling that story. I swear, it still brought a tear or two to our eye. Originally, Tata's last name was spelled with a G, Trugillo, but at some time he changed it to Trujillo. He changed the J to a G. It had something to do with jobs. His nephew Sonny said it was because Tata thought it sounded more Italian and it would be easier to find more work. All right, let's head off to our next destination now. His father's name was Prudencio. His mother is Amada. Prudencio was married to 2 sisters. The first wife was Manuela. She passed away. They had 2 sons, and then he married Tata's mom, Amada. Tata's grandparents, who came from Basque in Spain. Tony's family all came from New Mexico. Around 1885, they all went to Arizona, St. John's, Arizona. Auntie Duty, Tony's younger sister, is the only surviving Duran at 104 years old. Born and raised in Arizona. Duty Duran was born on October 27, 1921, and she just turned 104 years old in 2025. Tony and Tata had one daughter, Evelina Veranda Trujillo. Later, unofficially, she changed her name to Evelyn Vera Trujillo. We almost named you after her, but I changed my mind and decided to name you after my mother, Jacqueline Florez. She didn't have a middle name, so I chose the name Hope for your middle name, because I believe there's always hope in life. Tony and Tata had a small restaurant in San Bernardino. They expected Grandma to help working, which she didn't. That was about the time her and Papa were dating, and she was going back and forth for dances here in Arizona. She'd stay with her aunts, cousins, or friends, or talk Tony and Grandpa into going to Phoenix for the weekend. I guess her friends would drive down to pick her up, go back to Phoenix, and drive her back to San Bernardino. I can't see her taking a bus on her own. No way. Ernest Escobar Florez, Papa, as us kids called him, was born on March 5, 1926 in Litchfield, Arizona, and passed on June 29, 1996, living to a ripe old age of 70 years old. His mother was Magdalena Escobar Florez, born on May 25, 1908 in Santa Rita, New Mexico, and passed on February 16, 1982, living to a ripe old age of 73 years old. His father was Manuel Escamillas, born about 1901 and passed about 1960, living to about 59 years old. His stepfather was Roberto Florez, born about 1907 and passed about 1938, living to about 31 years old. It wasn't until he joined the Navy at 17 years old and seen some of the paperwork when he learned that Roberto was not his biological father. His biological father was Manuel Escamilla. He never spoke of this man as his father. Roberto Florez was the only dad he knew. He adopted him when he married Magdalena, and it was then that he took the proud name of Florez. He is one of 3 children. He has a younger brother and a sister, Robert Jr. and Josefina Florez. Papa's family came from New Mexico, Chihuahua, New Mexico, then moved to Arizona. Here's another story from Aunt Robin. Papa's family is Catholic, and being a Catholic, you pray to the saints. When Papa was a young boy living here in Arizona, he got very sick. He might have been around 8 years old. With Papa being very sick and taking him to the doctor, taking what meds they had, it didn't help and he wasn't getting better. His mother went to her church and prayed to her patron saint, which was one of her favorite saints, Santo Niño de Atocha. She prayed that if her saint would cure him, she promised that she would let his hair grow as long as his and would dress him to look like him. She prayed and prayed every day for a long while, and he got better and she kept her promise. His hair grew to almost his waist and she dressed him in blue overalls. Papa always said he didn't like his hair long, and since it was curly and it looked like he had long curls like a girl, he'd braid it, and then he said he looked like an Indian, which I'm sure given the era, it didn't make him too happy. Not until he finally got to cut them all off.
Alright, so here we are at another one of my favorite places in Shanghai. Former Missions Recoletos Office and Residence for Augustinian Mission Clergy. Alright, follow me inside and we'll take a look around. Come on in this way.
He was born in Litchfield Park, Arizona, and lived his younger years there. He never talked too much about his growing up days there. He sometimes talked about picking cotton and how his hands would bleed. He also spoke about picking fruit and swore he did it once and prayed he would never have to do that again. He never went into much detail about those days. Perhaps it was too painful, or he thought that it would make us sad. He was like that. He would never do anything to make any of us sad in any way. He was truly the most gentle, honest, and loving, devoted father and grandfather God has ever blessed us with. He was 16 years old when he left Arizona. He left his mother a note telling her that he was leaving home with his cousin Eddie. They were going to find work as field hands picking fruit in California. He left the note because he knew she would not let him leave home. It would break her heart. His heart knew that now he was the man of the family and he had to provide for them. His father had passed away when he was 12 years old. Being the responsible, caring person that he was, he endured this burden and loneliness with a calm perseverance that he kept the rest of his life. We all learn this lesson by his example. The Pearl Harbor surprise aerial attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on December 7, 1941. Papa was almost 16 years old at this time. He enlisted in the Navy on October 27, 1943. He was 17 years and 7 months old. He was a radio man, third-class radio operator. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in 1945, ending World War II on September 2, 1945. He was 19 years and 5 months old at this time. He got an honorable discharge on June 3, 1947, when he was 21 years old. He never talked much about the time he served during World War II, all the while sending letters and money to his mother. His beautiful letters show his love and obligations to family were always first and foremost to him. Upon returning home to Arizona, visiting his high school, he met the love of his life, our mother, Evelyn Trujillo. They eloped because her parents objected and the love they had for each other was not to be stopped. Someone told me at one time that Tata chased Papa away from their home and even threw his shoe at Papa. Eventually, as was Papa's way, he won their hearts and respect. They remarried in the Catholic Church on May 24, 1947, to satisfy their religious beliefs and their families. He told this story. When they were newly married and living in Globe, Arizona near their friends Gabby and Nellie, he was in flight school at Cutter Field in Globe, Arizona, pursuing his desire to be a pilot. Evelyn was attempting to make him dinner. She didn't know how to cook at all. Nothing, not even boil water. His friend Gabby was trying to teach her without Papa knowing, and he'd make different dishes, and Grandma, being Grandma, said she had made it. Papa was in school and working all day, so he never had a clue. I think he thought everyone knows how to cook. Her parents had a restaurant, for goodness sake. Papa and his friend were walking home from school up the hill and they see smoke. Well, they both go running up the hill and the trailer is on fire, just about burnt to the ground, and Grandma is standing there crying, saying she was cooking dinner on her own for the first time and forgot the pan and oil on the fire. Papa, being Papa, wasn't upset. He was just concerned that Grandma was okay, and they laughed when the whole story came out that it was his friend that had been cooking and was trying to teach Grandma. Wow, I'm so impressed with all of this, and I wish I could go back in a time machine and watch all of this history in real life. Also, I wish I could watch my own history of growing up with them. Aunt Robin has several letters between Grandma and Papa when he was in the Navy, and my mom has some too that I need to read and save the next time I visit. Also, Aunt Pam has some too.
Okay, next up is a letter written by my grandmother, Evelyn Florez. I was born on January 14th, 1928. Dr. Bolden delivered me at Grandma Modesto's house. We had a lot of friends. We used to go to the back of El Ranchito and dig up Indian pottery. That was fun. Then we would go get the sap from trees. We'd chew some of it. That was our gum and glue. It was better than flour. We'd put pots together with it. I had a girlfriend, Peggy, and she would tell us of her trips to Phoenix. Her mother was Mr. Shosto's maid, my Grandma Modesto's niece. Peggy would tell us of stuff on the streets, and it was hard, not dirt, and only cars used the streets. And the cars had lights, and people and cars would stop and go. Nobody told them to stop and go. And there were stores that were stacked on top of each other, and not like St. John's houses where they had the dances. It had one floor upstairs. They had the dances there, and I can't remember what was downstairs. The whole families went. Mothers put the babies in cardboard boxes and put them under the benches and go dance. And the older ones would play and dance. Then we moved to Albert Brown's ranch.
We had a helper. He was so nice, and his name was Willie. He was a Mormon. We had a couple of horses, cows, and chickens, and alfalfa was the thing we grew. My girlfriend, she lived in the other ranch nearby. She and I would go riding. One time we were racing in the alfalfa fields. We thought we were going faster than the birds, and the only thing, I fell off. I hurt, but my girlfriend, I had to get back on or I will be a loser. Tears and all, I got on and then I told her the story Peggy told me about her trip and about how they stacked up the buildings and even some of the houses had hard stuff on the streets. And about the airplanes, we'd chase them off when they flew over St. John's with rocks, and the mothers waved their aprons, and the kids, we'd chase them and throw rocks and holler at them. But in Phoenix, no one paid any attention to them. Peggy said she was scared. I'll tell you, when she went to LA and saw the ocean, sometimes we thought Peggy was telling us fat stories, and we'd tell her she was going to confess to the priest. But then she'd cross her heart that it was true. When we lived at the ranch, I'd love to ride pine, and we'd stop in the middle of the alfalfa fields. Oh, that smell is just like heaven, and all I could see was alfalfa all around me, and the clouds, and I would make figures and all of them and dream of the stories Peggy told me about Phoenix. Buildings stacked on top of each other, hard stuff on the streets, and no cows were allowed on the streets, and the place where people walk was also hard stuff, just for people. Peggy said she never saw one cow. Then, once in a while, we'd go into town on our wagon. I'd put my pretty dress on, long dress of course, ugly brown cotton stockings. I didn't like them, and my sunbonnet. And when we got close to town, Mother would take my wire curls off and start rubbing white chalk. Yes, chalk. We'd get it from under the ground and dust it off, pinch my cheeks. We went to Phoenix in Wilbur's truck. He used to go get food for his store. Mr. Udall had asked Daddy to go to Phoenix, and he'd give him a job running the city laundry. We didn't even know what a laundry was. He had just bought it. He said he'd have someone teach him. We had a little house on the side of the laundry. The laundry was a big place. Daddy and Mother both worked there. My Uncle Guy followed, and Daddy gave him a job there. He ran the big ringers. Then my Uncle Lugardo came. He was more interested in politics and got a job for the city later. He went on to liquor, narcotics undercover, and it was a dangerous job. He was a good officer because when he passed away, all the police force and other official cars came to the funeral. It was on TV. My Uncle Guy worked at Sky Harbor, the airport. In high school, I had a lot of friends. Good kids. The closest girls were Nellie, Sarah, Josie, Caroline, Sophie, Agnes, Mary T, Maud, and Sister Mary. Leo, Wee, Rose, Margaret. These were my high school friends. Some of my good friends were Toby, David, Bernie B, Sonny, Ernie Jr., Rudy D, Dickie W, Hanky, Mike R, Joe R, Joe F, Chuck, Ephraim, and Tony Hubu. We had such good times. What one of us didn't think of, the other did. And we used to have the dean of boys chase us on ditch days.
Cool. 就是你也跟他们在一起的，有。这本来你们那个老板是法国人，你现在有时候也带回来，对吧？可以去。 好。这个，
我有这个
这个
有的飞机
啊，对呀、就是反过来。只是他一直开车，也带人来的。他老婆是中国人。
这个是这样啊，我知道了。
Oh wow, it does. Very cool.
坐吧，坐这个。
This up here are the original ceiling.
这阳台，前面的阳台。
And
You got that fireplace in there too?
yeah, I did.
好，
Super cool. 谢谢。
Okay, we're getting near the end of this, and I hope you've stuck around. So here are some pictures of the Florez family before I was even thought of. Next up is a picture of me at about 1 month old with Tony and Tata, and that picture in the background must have been at my grandparents' house because they had that for a long time. And coming up next, we have a picture of my grandmother Evelyn, my great-grandmother Tony, Magdalena Florez, Papa's mother, and Modesta Duran, Nana. This picture was definitely taken in St. John's, Arizona. Next up is a picture in St. John's, Arizona. There's me at about, 11 years old. I was a fashion icon with my OP shorts and tube socks pulled up to my knees. There's my sister, my mom, my grandma, Evelyn Florez, and Tony Trujillo at the top, along with Nana in the middle, Modesta Duran.
Very rich.
They just sold it not long ago.
Now, Auntie Judy, do you remember this Indian that his name, the Indian that worked with you? This is probably a bigger picture of him right here, because I always have Tony and Auntie Barbara, but nobody seemed to know. This picture is of him, and so is this picture. Both of those
Where is
pictures.
it? Where is it? Oh,
Right
he's
here.
there. And nobody knows who he is.
I don't know who the Indian is, but this picture right here is Tony, the Indian. I don't know his name.
And Barbara.
And Auntie Barbara,
Also known as Native American.
Native
I
American.
don't know who he is.
And my mom could not remember him. This picture is of Ruben or Anthony. Him, Connie.
Wait a minute. This isn't Ruben or Auntie. This is
Is that Ruben or Anthony?
no. Who is this? Your
My
mother.
mom,
Your mom.
Evelyn.
And this is
I don't know who she is.
oh mira. Wait, I think. Well, if I could see it, it would be.
It doesn't work with
It's
that?
too dark.
Oh.
No.
So we'll finish up here with Florez Family History Part 3. In Part 4, we'll dive a little deeper on the letters between my grandparents that I already have and the new ones that I'll be looking at the next time we're in California. And in Part 4, we'll also start talking about when their kids were born. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and until next time, much love.
Okay, and if you want to see part 1 and part 2, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch them there.